and 2-year terms are done, then it's a 3-year term. But they wanted to stack it on since it was just a new board to make sure time. So once I'm reappointed, if I am reappointed by the mayor, I will serve a 3-year term. Okay. Can you hear me? Thank you so much. I normally have a loud mother voice. Okay. With my 3 sons and 2 granddaughters. So on your package, there's a complaints process. And so what do we do here? We have 2 avenues for complaints. So if a citizen comes to a location, and there's several locations throughout the city, they'll come to a location and say something has happened, I've been harmed in some capacity. That goes to the Office of Police Conduct and Review. If an officer says an officer did something wrong, that goes through internal affairs. An investigation ensues, and then once a packet is completed, then the panel and the civilian Police Oversight Commission will get the information to review. So on here, if a complaint is made by a resident, it is investigated by the City of Minneapolis, OPCR, and then the complaint of an officer, like I said, goes to the IA department. The review panel consisting of those members of the Community Commission on Police Oversight and 2 police officers, which is those 3 civilian and 2 sworn officers. And so anytime a panel comes up, we'll get a doodle poll or something like that. And they'll say, are you available for these panels? And if they say yes, then we'll get an email and says, you're gonna sit on a panel with 2 sworn and 3 civilian. And so we'll go up to the meeting, everyone will get the file ahead of time. The files could be very large. If you could imagine 20, 30 body-worn camera videos, you're looking at discipline matrix for that year. Some of the files that we're getting are very old, unfortunately. So we'll have a file that may be 3 years old because they are very far behind investigating complaints against the police right now. Well, you have to go back and look at the discipline matrix from 2021, for example. You can't look now. So we'll have to review that, what was in place when the officer committed or alleged to have committed some infraction, and then we have to review the entire file. That's hours of work. Some of the commissioners are looking at 1,000 pages of documents just for one file. And once they go through all the documents, we meet in a Teams format, and then they'll say, what did you think? What did you think? What did you think? Everyone gets the opportunity to speak. What I have found in this process is it's very humanizing to police officers for me. They go through the same things that we go through. Everyone's trying to figure out how to process information that they're looking at. And the 2 sworn officers are lieutenant or higher. So they're the bosses of these officers. They've talked to them, they've interacted with them, they know them on a daily basis. However, we're just meeting the person. We don't really know them, we never see the person in person, we just read what's on the piece of paper. So it's a very unique perspective to read about someone that you've never met and then make a decision based on what they have done. And when I did that, I realized it is very humanizing. Actions that they have done in the community, whether you may recognize their name or not, you realize, okay, they committed an offense like anyone else, and they deserve the same fair process. If anyone was at work and did an infraction, that they need to make sure they investigate and get their due process, and then you come up with the result. So I found that to be very helpful sitting in this space, talking to the officers. And it's very good conversation between the officers and I and everyone else on the panel. We may disagree, but it's always a civil conversation. They recognize that we're coming from a community perspective, that we may not have all that institutional knowledge, but they hear us, they listen to us, and then we come to a consensus about what we should all agree to for the panel. It doesn't mean that we all have to agree. We can submit our own decision. So the panel process, every member on the panel submits their own decision. And then if there's a majority and we 3 out of the 5 agree, we present that. If we don't agree, we still present it. It goes to the chief. What I would like to see change is, or be more transparent, is when the chief gets those decisions from us, he tells us what he's done with them. We have not heard yet. So I've done panels since December. I have not heard yet to do with any of our decisions that we made in this now May. So I would like to see that change. And I know there's conversations about that. A recent law change in Minnesota has added some additional powers to civilian oversight. I know Council President Payne has decided to reopen the ordinance, as you heard in the news, and kind of look at what that may look like. Just discussing right now, nothing set in stone. But since there was a law change, we'll see what that does to affect us. But other than that, the panel process is very interesting. It can take quite some time for the Office of Police Conduct Review to review the whole packet. It goes through an attorney, it goes through various processes before it gets to us. Several checks are made. That's the issue though, because if you saw in the news and in your packet, I think you guys had that in your packet, they are very far behind. We have some legacy cases that are 2 years or more. I think our biggest case is 1,700 days old. For police conduct. So we definitely want to make sure that they get the resources they need to get those cases done, because that's entirely too long for a case to be outstanding. As I'm sure you've all seen on the news, there's been a lot of things going on in the Office of Police Conduct and Review in the Civil Rights Department. What I will say from my firsthand knowledge is they're doing the best that they can. I think our city manager took the steps to do what she needed to do to make some things happen, but it is a work in progress, and it's a big enterprise. And so they're all trying to work together to make sure that we get the information that we need to continue to move our work forward, but it is a work in progress. On your packet, CCPO processes for complaints against MPD, we have a diagram there. So the investigation is completed by MPD Internal Affairs Department, and then, or OPCR, and then the review of investigative report by the review panel. Just make sure that people are understanding that the matrix that's decided is the one that was in place when they committed the alleged infraction. I think some people, when we look at the discipline matrix, it could be so different from year to year. They change policies, the chief says he wants to add this or change the language here, and now that we have a consent decree pending and a settlement agreement, things are changing with the language around use of force in particular. So we just gotta make sure that we're looking at the current matrix of when they committed the offense, and not necessarily where we are now with the consent decree coming or the settlement agreement, because it doesn't make sense if it wasn't in place in how we look at the previous case. So we're making sure that we are mindful of that. The accountability process timeline. The complaint is submitted by email, online, or by phone. The Unity Community Mediation Team has worked with the City of Minneapolis to make sites around the city to make sure that people can file a complaint without coming downtown. There was a recognition that some people are not comfortable coming into the police center or the new office building to file a complaint. So there's one at City Hall, the NAACP office over in North Minneapolis, the UCMT headquarters in South Minneapolis. There's one at Little Earth at the Indigenous Protector Movement, New Salem Baptist Church over in North Minneapolis, and the Somali Education and Social Advocacy Center in South Minneapolis. So they did try to make it as accessible as possible to have people in their designated hours during the day. Say, come in, if you want to file a complaint, we'll help you fill out the complaint. We want to make sure that you get heard. One of the things the city is doing per the ordinance is to make sure that everyone gets the opportunity to come and talk to us. So on May 21st, which is in a couple weeks, we come by very quickly, at 6 p.m. at the Public Service Building in room 100, CCPO will have their first public hearing as by ordinance. And so it's for the community to come, ask questions, and they're like, yes. The Public Service Building is, if you're familiar with the Government Center, I'll get the exact address, but the Government Center is attached to the Government Center, Minneapolis building they built, where the big one with the glass on 4th Street. So it's right in the skyway next to the Government Center, room 100. And so they will have our public hearing there. It's got audio visual to be able to record it for the public, but they really want people to come in person and ask the questions. What are you seeing? What do you want to talk about? This is what we have. As of late, our new monitor team, Alifa, out of New Orleans, they have been coming to all of our meetings. They've been flying in and being really resourceful. They come in all the time. One of the members, I see her in the Government Center. She's in the Skyway. She's always here. So I'm encouraged by that because she's taking the time to be in Minneapolis, even though she doesn't live here, to really get started on the work for the monitor. So I believe that they will be at the meeting on the 21st. Don't quote me, but I heard that they may be here, should be flying in, and their team be flying in for that. That was my last understanding. But it's really good to be able to talk to them because they're doing great work. One of the things that we're looking at CCPO is to be able to have some bigger avenue to influence, or actually not influence, to be able to be a part of the consent decree. Right now, we really don't have a role. So the settlement agreement kind of defines that you have to have a civilian oversight commission, and that you have to have outreach strategies to recruit diverse commissioners, sufficient support for meaningful participatory oversight, and then talks about review panels. But other than that, the consent decree doesn't really have a space for us. So we're trying to have conversations about what that would look like for the consent decree. The goal is to have this one monitor be able to monitor the settlement agreement and the consent decree, and then have a place for us so that we're continuing this work. I know that there's a lot of conversation in the community about civilian oversight of the police. I really like the venue of the Community Commission on Police Oversight. I think it meets that need because they are appointed by their wards to do this work. So does anyone have any questions so far? I can talk forever. Yes.
So, once a complaint is made against a police officer, and it takes several years for that complaint to wend its way through the system, does that police officer still stay on the force in the same position, on that, even if it's an egregious complaint?
That's my understanding. I would say.
Can you please summarize this first question? I'll get the mic out to the people for future questions.
Sounds good. So in terms of having a complaint open for a long time, are they able to still stay on the force? So I'll say that the ones that are old or were before CCPO's time. They had the PCOC, that old commission that wasn't really meeting, and people were upset that it wasn't really meeting. Those cases are from back in the day. The ones that are coming in now, I would say they're trying their best to move much quicker, but they do have those legacy cases. So when the officer has been alleged to have done something and they go through the due process, yes, they still, to my understanding, stay on their current assignment until whatever happens. Yep. Looks like any other discipline, guilty or innocent to proven guilty kind of this thing, and so they're able to just continue to do their thing. And if there's something that's immediate, I'm assuming the officer supervisor will address that. No, come on with it. This is for y'all.
I don't know, I just walked in. But they should have the citizens walk around drive around with police officers every now and then, different citizens of different ethnicities, to go on a night or evening with a police officer. And then that citizen can write up like what they would see they would do different. Because it's easy from outside, put yourself in their shoes, and then they might say, oh, well, in this situation, we would have did this different based on our community and our culture or whatever. So I think they should, be more proactive instead of waiting for these things to happen and how we're going to handle them. Have citizens sign up to drive around with the police, not get out of the car, of course, but in a dangerous situation or something, but drive around and see, and then they can give them comments, because they're just people that might not have had all these life experience like someone in the community. So just because you're a police officer doesn't mean you've had every life experience and know every culture, and you try to do your best. I mean, little kids, young people want to be police officers when they're young, and that's what they do. But it doesn't mean they know all the environments they're going to be in and how to deal with them necessarily. So I think having regular people drive around with them on evening shift, night shift, day shift, and give them some positive feedback of things they could do different based on what that person knows about the community and the culture and so on and so on.
I've had the opportunity to do a ride-along, and I'd assume that the chief, if he'll make a space for that, I can't speak for the chief and what the MPD would do about ride-alongs, but I found it to be very informative when I did one. And it was a different, unique perspective to see it from how they see it when they're in the back of their car. I'm sorry. Oh, I didn't. I actually did this before my time on CCPO, and so it was just a bit.
Because they're doing their thing and they're not necessarily the communities doing their thing. There needs to be some kind of bridge between what's going on there and what they're doing. Some kind of info communication exchange.
to me, it's kind of the balance between community policing and intelligence-led policing, and it's really getting into community. And what I would really, not outside from CCPO, but me personally, is to see officers get really acclimated into the community with the community organizations who's actually living there, and get back to that community piece. Because when you're in community, it's easier to enforce laws in the community if you're a part of the community. So I would love to see that cultural competency come and be more forthcoming when you do that. I've talked to officers all the time that I would love to see before you even come out of the academy, for example. Maybe you can go and be in a community organization. Who are the violence interrupters? Who are those community organizations? Who are the ones that are boots on the ground? Are you aware of them? Do you know where they work? Do you know how to give access to something that you see on the community, access to these services, because you know exactly where their office is? Some of those things I would love to see. I know the chief is working on some things, but me personally would love to see things like that in the future.
I'm concerned to hear, after all of the good work you do, that you don't know the outcome. That seems inconceivable to me. I want to know how the chief explains that to you, and if it can change in statute or other thing, because it seems like a huge ask of this committee to then not know the results. It doesn't have to be public, but it has to come back to the committee.
I would love for it to come back to us at some point, but I also understand, as a union president, that they have to be able to go through the steps. So if someone goes in to appeal the decision that we've made, or the chief has made, and then it has to go to potentially do arbitration, it takes a while. My hope is that once that is done, there's a full report of, yes, this complaint came through, yes, the decision came through here, this is what happened here, and then here's the end result, once all that process is done. Because I also understand that these are employees of the city, and they still have to go through the due process. And so they may appeal the decision, and we wouldn't know that because it wouldn't be public information, which is why I expect the chief hasn't said anything to us. But at some point, I would like to know what's the result of all this work we've put in and these hours of review of all these documents to make a recommendation to the chief. I would love to see the back end.
Hi.
Hi.
I have a little follow-up to her question, then I have my original question. I hope that's okay. Isn't there a dashboard that once the case is resolved, that is public information?
Yes.
On what happened to even if they're found innocent, or?
Yes.
So there is a result dashboard?
There is a result. What I would like to see in relation to CCPO is the ones that we've had interactions with to come to us with those decisions. There's many things that happen that go on that dashboard that we may not even ever see. But in terms of the ones that we see, I want to know that the work that we've done, what has been the result of the decision based on what we recommended.
Right.
Yeah.
So you could follow it kind of along.
Exactly, yeah. But the dashboard, I know they're working on the dashboard. There's been some bugs on it, but they are working on it and trying their best. We have a great Commander Wilkes in the implementation unit who's doing her best to get all that information on there. She's working really hard. Took all that community input from those listening sessions back in the fall, and that will also be presented on May 21st at the public hearing.
Now, my question is, the CCPO also has another role in trying to develop better policy or procedures, depending on what you're seeing come through. Mm-hmm. It used to be that the whole committee couldn't see the information, and just 4 people could see it. Can you now, as the 15 people, see all the information on the complaints so that you can see what's happening, or is it still sort of compartmentalized?
Do you mean the complaints that we have actually touched? Can we see the information? Or are you talking about any complaint that comes into the?
You were saying you get a packet
Yes.
of the file, the investigation. Mm-hmm. Does everybody on the committee now get to see all the files?
The ones that get to see the investigation that you're working on, the ones that have been assigned to that panel.
Okay.
So if there's 3 civilians that have been assigned, they get to see the entire packet for that particular officer.
But the other 12 people don't get to see the packet?
No, I think it would be, I'd be a full-time job, maybe 80-hour-a-week job to do that.
Yeah,
because they're so big, the files are so large.
Right.
But yes, once they identify the 3 civilians.
When you come together to maybe talk about possible policy changes, then can you discuss what you've seen with the other members?
We can't.
As long as you don't say names?
We can't discuss the cases. We sign paperwork to keep them confidential because, again, this is an employee file. So we do keep that confidential. But what we do is we have a policy and research group. It's a subcommittee, what they would call a working group of the commission, and we look at settlement agreements and consent decrees from all over the country, Seattle, Baltimore, et cetera, et cetera. And so we look and see what they did, what were they doing around use of force policies, and we bring that information back to the group. And then what we'll do is we have a research assistants that help us. That's a good team. And so if we ask a question, I want you to research this and put this together, they will do that for us. And then that will help us answer some of the questions that we have to move forward. So the commission is responsible to make policy, to look at the chief's policies and review those. I know the ordinance has 120 days. We're trying to figure out how that actually is going to implement, though. When he makes a policy change on this date, we have 120 days, or when he thought about it, made a memo, we're still trying to get that part, that part worked out. So it's baby steps in terms of that. But we've been in commission for a year. And we also get the opportunity to have input on his review. That's also one of the charges of CCPO. So.
Can you address the timing? Because in all of the reports from the state and the DOJ and the mayor's original commission, this whole business about just the lack of timing and how many of these disciplinary actions have been sitting on the chief's desk for like 2, 3, 4 years. And I mean, it's having a long time go between the incident and any kind of disciplinary action. It's really hard to change culture if people don't know what's wrong and no action is taken to address things. And if I start to just add up dates in here, it seems like there's almost no way for this thing to go any quicker. I was looking at 180 days, 30 days, and so maybe could you just talk about timing a little bit, because it seems like this lack of quick response. So I guess it's sort of generally looking at timing, and then is this timing the same for everything? If there's something like super egregious, can something more quickly happen? Like you look at the Derek Chauvin thing, that obviously didn't go through a 2-year process. That something happened more quickly. So people around in the force know that, hey, that's bad, we're taking immediate action, and that sends a really strong message around culture change. So could you talk a little bit about timing?
So I don't know about the thing sitting on his desk for 2, 3, or 4 years. I don't know necessarily that's the process. I think as it goes through the investigation process with the attorneys and everyone else, I don't think it sits on the chief's desk that long. I can't speak to that succinctly, but I know that with the process and the investigation report, that takes the longest time. So as you know, we now have a new law firm that's helping us get through these cases. Before it was Jones Day, because they have to go through and do all their due diligence before it even gets to step 2, step 3, step 4. As far as something immediate, so something significantly egregious, I imagine the chief will take whatever action he or the team needs to take for something egregious. These are complaints from the community and complaints from internal with the officers. And so if there's something like that, that may go through a different route because it's not a civilian complaint per se. And it could be, but if the chief needs to do whatever he needs to do, I'm sure he'll take care of that, so.
Hi. Thank you so much for all this great information.
Absolutely.
You mentioned that as you're looking at older cases, you are having to look at the discipline matrix of that time period. How would you characterize the changes in the disciplinary matrices from where you first started looking at them to where they are now?
That's interesting because the ones that I've had the opportunity to review have been all around the same time frame. And so I can speak to the fact that they look pretty similar because the cases that I reviewed have been 21 or 22. Things are changing now in 23 and 24, and I haven't had the opportunity to review a case from 23 and 24 because they're still working their way through the queue with their attorneys. So I'll speak to the ones that I've actually reviewed, and they're pretty similar with the discipline matrix. They're very defined, but it's a lot of words. I would love to see it get a little bit easier to read for the community to be able to read the policy and understand it. And so they are looking at ways too, like how can we make this so it's truly understandable by the public? This is what we do. This is the policy on use of force. I know they took some steps to make it easier to click online on the dashboard to read the policies, because sometimes you couldn't even find them, because they were clicking, and so they're trying to make it less clicks so that you can get to what you're looking for. I do believe the city really wants to make this as transparent as possible, while recognizing that we have employees who have due process, and they have the right to go through that process before a decision has been made. And I think I would like to, that's the one thing I want to stress, is it has to go through the process. They have the right to go through that process. Especially as a union president, I say that all the time, you have to go through the process, even though we want things to move quicker. I know there's been a lot of conversation in the community, it should go quick, but I want it to be fair, and I want it to be done right, so the employee gets what they need, the city gets what they need, and the community for sure gets what they need.
Hi, thank you again so much for coming, especially on a beautiful Sunday morning. I'm a member here. I live in Minneapolis. I spent most of my career with Ramsey County in mental health, working with St. Paul Police. And I've been retired for several years, so I still continue to think I'm an expert on everything there. But
I feel that.
there has always been what has called the Minneapolis way, and what would be considered in St. Paul excessive force was considered everyday activity for Minneapolis police. And somewhat, their commission is very important and everything, but it's a little bit of closing the barn door after every well, you know, I can't think of the metaphor now. But, you know, I think the culture that has to change is in two big areas. In the hiring process of looking at people who are really well trained in de-escalation and an understanding of institutional racism. And Minneapolis has always been thought of often as very behind in that. And in leadership, who you hire, all those things. And I hope that that can be part of what you also can be doing in informing leadership in the city of Minneapolis, that you have who you recruit, what you believe is the philosophy, how you train and how you oversee really has to change in Minneapolis, or I think it'll be just what you're trying to do too late down the road often. So
what I would encourage you to do, and I receive that, what I would encourage you to do is when they have these open community sessions, to bring that forward about what training should look like and who should be doing training for the officers. I think the city is wanting to hear from the community a lot, because they understand this is a community fix. We're only going to be able to do this when everyone works together at it. It can't be in silos anymore. People have to come out of their house and be involved in the process and say, this is what I want to see. So definitely bring those training things forward to say, I would love to see officers be able to do this and get these type of trainings. And I'm sure that's going to be a part of the community conversations when it comes to when the consent decree is done, which we're still not there yet for the consent decree.
Hi.
Hi.
So, given this very detailed and prolonged process, how often is a police officer actually disciplined? I mean, is there like a percentage or something that you can give us? I mean, how do we, as the public, citizens of Minneapolis, how do we learn about that?
The dashboard would tell you that. I don't have that number off the top of my head of how often an officer is disciplined. What I will say is the dashboard does have officers' names, so you can look up a specific officer and look at their record in terms of what's public information. So anything that they've been disciplined for, that's on the dashboard. So you can go on there. So if you have an officer's name that you've heard about, or just peruse the names, oh, this officer, this, maybe in this precinct I'm seeing this, that data is online on Minneapolis' website.
Hi, thank you for being here. It's nice to see you.
Yes, thank you.
I wanted to know, the Office of Civil Rights, what do they do, and do you have any, do you work with them? Because we haven't had, a head of the Office of Civil Rights, because there were 3 people who were dismissed in the last, 5 years. We've had 3 different people. And what is it that they do? And do you work with them?
Civil rights is the overarching over OPCR, which is then, or CCPO, because that's the CCPO, OPCR, Civil Rights Department. As far as working with them day to day, not so much. I mean, we have Director Amiti, who is currently the over the interim for OPCR, and then Margaret Anderson Kelleher is the interim over Civil Rights Department. But Civil Rights just gives us the direction at the top, and then we just kind of do under OPCR. So limited exposure, other than they're giving us a report at the commission meetings, but most of my interaction is with OPCR and interim director immediate at this point. And yes, there has been some turnover at that department, but hopefully it will write itself out and we'll keep it moving because we got a lot of work to do in the city, but it's kind of just moving forward.
It just sounded like, you read what you read in the paper.
Yes. Mhm.
And so what I've seen, or what I read in the paper, is that they were also, this person was not really following up, or they weren't doing the work, but it seems like that you're saying the same thing. You do this work and there's this big backlog.
Yes.
But these people were, I don't want to use the word accused, but that's what they said, that they were not doing the work.
There's definitely a backlog, and there was definitely not giving us good information at that last meeting in, I want to say March, when we asked specific questions about the backlog, because now that department has two, what I'll call directors, one for the legacy cases, which are older, and one for the newer cases. But the question was not answered for us at that meeting of, well, how many cases are we talking about? There was no answer. So it definitely could have been more information and more transparency about the cases we were talking about, because at that time, we still didn't know the numbers. And then when they came in and did the reset and gave us the numbers, we now know we have these many cases. Was 1,700 days was the oldest case. We want to get through this. We're taking these steps to make it happen, and we're going to move forward. And so I appreciate that. But yes, there was a backlog issue, because again, if we don't know how many cases we're talking about, and we're only doing 2 or 3, maybe 4 panels a month, but we have significant backlog. But those 2, 3, 4 panels are a lot of hours if you give them all to the same person, right? If that person's the only one available during the time that you're having a panel, then that person can get 2, 3, 4 cases a month, and it is a lot. It could at some point become a full-time job if you think about it, if they're having all to read all of that. So they try to spread the love between all the commissioners. But yes, it's a work in progress, and now that I think they're addressing the backlog, to at least we know the number. Now the expectation is, from the community perspective, let's get it taken care of. You have the numbers, you have the attorney now that's going to be working on the cases. Let's get through the process, and I think they're working towards that.
So we've hired outside attorneys.
Yes, we went through and got another attorney firm. The name is at the top of my head. I don't want to say the name wrong, but it was Jones Day, and now they hired someone else to help them get through the case. The name escapes me. It's a 2-name. It's all in the news, though. You can look it up.
Good morning.
Good morning.
We know that there's a reduced staffing of sworn officers. The police numbers are way down. Does that affect having police officers available to serve on these panels and slow down the process? Because obviously there's a lot of pressure on scheduling and assigning people.
Absolutely. In the beginning, when we first started in May, and then as we got through the process of trying to figure out trainings and everything else, there were not enough sworn officers to be on the panels. That was initially. And then they had to be trained on the panel process, and we had to be trained on the panel process. So all the growing pains happened in several months, and so yes, initially there was not enough, in our opinion, sworn officers to be able to sit on the panels. Now I think they're kind of working through that to make sure they have people available. But if you think about it, the city's down hundreds of officers, and you have to have lieutenant or above for the panels. And if some have to go out on the community, whatever they got going on, it can get tight in terms of scheduling. So I think they do the best they can with the officers that they can, but it does get a little tight sometimes with their schedule. But initially, yes, that was a significant concern. There just weren't enough people around, and then they weren't trained. They couldn't fit the trainings in because they were in community, and so it just kind of snowballed. But I think we're getting into a better place now where they're figuring that part out.
Thank you for being here this
Absolutely.
morning, for the work you do.
Thank you, absolutely.
I want to bring in a personal story. I have a friend that was in Ramsey County for 10 years, went to the business world for 10 years, 15 years, and is back policing, and just started about 3 months ago. And his observations are the new recruits coming in are a little extreme on their version of what policing looks like.
Okay.
And, we hear this, we're in church today, we hear this on, you know, you think about the Catholic Church, and they're having a hard time recruiting people to go into the church, and so some of these priests are like very doctrinated, and their views of the world are really unique. What do you need us to do as community members? You know, you're downstream. You're investigating, you know, the cases of existing officers, but what do you need us to do to help your cause? Do you think that we need to start asking? I appreciated your comments and questions around who we're recruiting and how we're supporting these police officers in their training. What can we do to help you so that these cases go down?
So I'll back up a little bit on that question. What I would like to see happen is for everyone to recognize who we're talking about. We're talking about officers that come in day to day, do their job, and do some of the hardest things in the city. But we're also talking about a community that deserves policing that is equitable and fair, and that everyone goes home at night, right? And so there's a line there in the middle. And so I would love to see community say what they really need from officers, because as you said, some of them are a little extreme when they come in. Whether that's from what they thought Minneapolis is, or they're coming in a defensive posture, I have no idea. But what I would love to see happen is for them to recognize that I'm just as human as they are, and everyone else is. And the extreme part, your thought or what you thought was going to happen or what you thought was going to come about by being in Minneapolis was just something that you heard on the news. I don't want us to be the stereotype in Minneapolis. And I've been born and raised here, and me personally would love to see, okay, you have a job to do and I have a job to do. I want to go home, you want to go home. Do your job, do it fair, do it equitably. Same on my part. You know, I can be respectful, but we have to understand that we're all a community. And you don't have the right to come to community and do harm to the community with your extreme views. This ain't the place, right? But how do we do that? How do you change someone's mind? How do you get them to have a lived experience that they never had before? They may not know what it means to be in the inner city. No, I don't know where they come from, but maybe that's a different experience for them. So how do we slow down and give them the opportunity to be in community, to understand who we are a little bit, right? So that they can come in and say, I want to be a part of this community, instead of doing harm to it. Right? And so that's a work in progress from everyone. It starts with us, me personally. I'll talk about myself. If I walk up to an officer, hello, how are you? If they not acting up, I'm not acting up, right? I don't personally, it's just me. I'm saying that caveat. I look at it like I don't like to put people in a box, right? And say that everyone is one thing because they're one group. Right, and no one does. But I hear a lot in community that because a shirt is worn and a badge is worn and a gun is carried, that you're all the same. And I think that leads to some of the extremism that you hear, because they automatically assume how they're going to be treated. They deserve to be treated with respect, but we dang sure do as well, right? We deserve to be treated with respect. We pay salaries, we live here, we grow up here, we have our children here, everyone deserves to be safe. So how do you balance the two so everyone gets what they need? And that's community really talking to people, talking to your neighbors, talking to those people that have really big ideas about police. I do it every day. And people tell me there are different views of police and everyone's entitled to them. But when I ask them, well, where did you get this premise from? How are you? Did you have harm, or did you hear on the news, or did your friend tell you? Because then I like to break it down, and then they'll ask me my opinion. And I'm really good at doing that, telling them my opinion. And so we have good conversations about it. But community has to recognize that everyone is in the community, and if you're extreme, I mean, we have extreme police officers, we have extreme politics. We're a polarized community right now in terms of politics. It's conversations. We may think differently, but we all here, and we all want Minneapolis to be safe. We all want Minneapolis to thrive, I would say, right? Can't speak for everybody, but for the most part, I think everyone wants the best for the city. So how do we have communication so that we can recognize that we're all human? That's such a work in progress from 400 years of how we got here. And the institution of racist policing, we know that. But how do we move forward? Because we have to, right? We can't stay stuck 400 years ago, right? In my opinion, just my opinion. We have to just find ways to move forward. But that's harder for some. And we have to respect that it's harder for some. It truly is. But how do we have a conversation so we can figure out, well, what do they need? Or what do you need? And what does anyone need for public safety? Everyone deserves public safety in the way that they would like to see it. It's not one or the other, right? But the community, the police, everyone needs to be involved in that conversation. And I think our chief is trying to do a good job of that.
This question is drawing on your deep experience and interaction with MPD at all levels, and you've seen it, I mean, from the street to the officer to police chief to the whole justice system. And I'm just curious, going back to your question about culture change, do you see among the more senior people now, because that's where culture change starts, is pressure from the top. Do you see among the senior people in public safety in the city a real commitment to do this?
The one that I've interacted with, yes. I haven't interacted with all of them, for sure, but the ones I've had the pleasure of sitting down with meetings with and having conversations with, I think they really want to change the culture. I think it affects them too when you're talking about Minneapolis and policing, because they're the ones walking around the uniform. I'm sure they've heard it from all over the country, wherever. Oh, your department is this, your department is that, this city's this, the city's that. So they've heard it too. And the ones, the higher ups, how do we change the culture, right? Well, recognizing we're in a system of policing that's inherently racist to a certain extent. How do we change it? How do we change and move forward with new culture, new folks that want to come in? It's a work in progress. And I think but it starts in community. I think everyone has to slow down a minute and say, what do we want to see from policing and how do we help it get there, right? How do we help it get there? Instead of just, everything's all messed up, it's all terrible. Yes, it is to a certain extent, but I have hope that it will get better. I have hope that we can move forward. I have hope that community members will come out and say, I really want to help this process in all levels, youth all the way up to our veterans, our elders that have so much lived experience. How do we get everyone into the conversation?
We've got time for one more question. Is there anybody who hasn't had a chance to ask a question yet who would like to ask the last question? All right.
This may be the dumbest question, but I arrived a little late. Is your commission a response to the federal lawsuit, or is it a response, outgrowth of the old Civil Rights Commission, or a third way?
I'm going to say it was in response to the settlement agreement, but we came into play before the settlement agreement was signed. And so, with that being said, if you can imagine, the Community Commission on Police Oversight was December of 2022. If I can recall, the settlement agreement was signed in the spring of 23. That's off the top of my head, months later. And so there may be some things that we need to work out in terms of the city council needs to work out in terms of what settlement agreement said and what our ordinance said, right? Which is why they're looking at that. But again, the consent decree, so do we wait till the consent decree is done? I don't know what the president of the city council plans on doing, but I know he's very interested in having the conversation to kind of look at some options. The safe, yes, that was your, yeah, he was co-chair. Yes, some of that came from that report, I imagine. But again, work in progress because we have another federal agreement coming down. What is our place? What does that look like for civilian oversight with the new law change from Minnesota? Will that law change again? Who knows? Will our scope of our responsibilities change? We don't know at this point. We're just kind of waiting to see. But right now, their plate is full. So.
Okay. Latonya, thank you so much.
Thank you.
It's really good to hear from someone in the middle of things.
Thank you so much. Thank you, guys.
Okay. So we had a chance to hear from someone who's in the middle of it all. Good to get an insider's view. Thanks so much. Next week, we have an interesting program called From Minister to Mechanic, a woman who was a minister in a church who decided that she could do more good by opening an auto shop for poor people to get auto service. So I think it'll be a fascinating program next week. Please join us. Thanks so much.